Okay, so let's dive into this. You sent over a bunch of really interesting stuff, and it seems like it's all about something that anyone who's ever tried to be creative knows about, writer's block.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Blaize on Fire, they actually open their writing with this question: does that ever happen to you?
Right.
And, well, I think we all know the answer to that. It's that feeling of being just completely stuck. It seems like it's something pretty much everyone goes through at some point.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So what we want to do today is really get into these sources that you sent and see if we can kind of, like pull out some things that are really practical.
Yeah.
Some strategies that you can actually use to get past those times when you feel like you just, can't write anything.
Exactly. And what's really cool about Blaize's take on it is they don't frame it as if like something's wrong with you if you experience writer's block. Yeah. It's like this is a common thing. It happens to everyone. And there are all sorts of things you can try to work through it.
Totally. Okay, so why don't we jump right in and start with something that, maybe it sounds a little bit obvious, but Blaize actually talks about changing your environment.
Uh-huh.
So this could be, if you usually write in one room, maybe try going to a different room or getting outside, finding a coffee shop. Blaize even says that even just changing your position in the same room can actually make a difference.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds really simple, but what's actually going on there, it's more than just kind of like a change of scenery, right?
Right. I think what's happening is when you change your environment, you're basically introducing novelty, right? Mm. And there's research that suggests that novelty can actually increase your dopamine levels, which, as you know, are linked to motivation and creativity. Mm. So, everyone tells you to go to a coffee shop, but you could even just try changing things up in your workspace, right? Like change the lighting, listen to different music, even just face a different direction. And that might give you that little jolt of newness that can, kind of unstick your thinking.
I like that idea. So it's almost like you're tricking your brain a little bit into a fresh state of mind.
Exactly.
Okay, so Blaize also talks about free writing and brainstorming.
Yeah.
And these are things that, a lot of people have probably heard of, but what's kind of a specific way that Blaize suggests using these techniques to deal with writer's block?
Well, free writing, as Blaize talks about it, is really just getting words on the page. It's not about, being perfect or even making sense. You set a timer and you just write continuously whatever comes to mind. It doesn't even have to be related to what you're working on. The point is to get your hand moving, to kind of loosen up the flow.
Okay.
Brainstorming, on the other hand, that's more about generating ideas specifically for the project you're stuck on. And with brainstorming, the key is quantity over quality, at least in the beginning. Just get all the ideas out, even if they seem silly or impossible. You can use lists, mind maps, whatever works for you.
So it's like free writing is kind of like warming up the engine, even if you don't know where you're going yet.
That's a good way to put it.
And then brainstorming is kind of like casting a really wide net to try to catch as many ideas as you can.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is it about those, those kind of less structured approaches that can be so powerful when you're feeling blocked?
I think one of the biggest things is that both free writing and brainstorming, they help you get around your inner critic,
Yeah.
That voice that's always telling you that your ideas aren't good enough or that you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
When you're not worrying about being perfect, when you're just letting things flow, your mind can make these unexpected connections, You start to explore things you might normally just dismiss. You might even surprise yourself with what comes out.
It's like giving yourself permission to be messy.
Exactly.
And Blaize actually suggests, after this, maybe just try a quick 5-minute free write, even if it's just on your current project, just to see what happens.
Yeah, give it a shot.
Okay, so you've shaken things up. You've done some free writing and brainstorming. What's next on Blaize's list of strategies for dealing with writer's block?
Well, the next thing Blaize talks about is re-engaging with your project. And what that means is actually going back and rereading what you've already written, looking over your notes, outlines, anything you've got.
So it's like going back and revisiting what you've already done.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that for some people that might actually be a little bit discouraging. Like if you're already feeling stuck and then you go back and you read something that you're not totally happy with.
Yeah, I can see that.
So how do you make that a positive experience rather than a negative one?
You bring up a really good point. The key here is not to go back and start critiquing or trying to fix things right away. Instead, try to approach it with fresh eyes, like pretend somebody else wrote it. Focus on remembering what you were excited about when you first started the project. What were the big ideas you wanted to explore? What was the overall direction you had in mind? often just immersing yourself in what you've already done can rekindle that initial spark.
Yeah.
And this is really important. It can also help you see the next step. Like, you might realize there's a natural connection you hadn't noticed before, or that the answer to where to go next is already there in what you've written.
So it's not about dwelling on the things you don't like. It's about reminding yourself of what you already have, and then using that as a springboard to move forward.
Right.
Okay, so what if you're not stuck on what to write, but more on like the approach? Or maybe you're just not feeling very inspired by the topic itself.
In that case, Blaize suggests trying to shift your focus and perspective. What this means is trying to look at your project from a completely different angle. Like, if you're writing a story, imagine you're one of the characters, but with a different motivation or point of view. If you're writing nonfiction, try to think about a reader who knows absolutely nothing about the topic. What questions would they have? Or, even better, try to argue against your own main points. What would someone who completely disagrees with you say?
So you're basically trying to step outside your own head.
Yeah.
And how does that actually help with writer's block?
Well, when you force yourself to consider all these different viewpoints, you can often spot things you missed before.
Okay.
Like plot holes in a story or parts of an argument that aren't very clear. You might even come up with entirely new ideas or directions you hadn't thought of before. Like, you're challenging your own assumptions and seeing your project in a new light.
Right.
For example, if you're writing a scene from one character's perspective, try writing it from the villain's perspective. You might discover new things about the conflict or about what motivates the characters, and that can make your original scene even better.
It's almost like you're putting on a different pair of glasses to see your project in a new way.
Exactly.
So for those of you listening, if you're stuck, try this. Imagine you're someone who knows nothing about your topic. What are the basic questions they would ask? That can help you figure out where you need to add more information or explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've tried all that, but what if you're still feeling like your creative well has just run dry? Like you just have no new ideas at all?
That's when Blaize says it's time to seek inspiration and input from outside sources. And this means actively engaging with stuff that's relevant to your project, reading books and articles, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts, that sort of thing. But it also means talking to other people, other writers, colleagues, friends, get their feedback, see what ideas they have. It's about actively trying to fill up your creative tank again by looking outside yourself.
I see. So what is it about that kind of external engagement that can be so helpful in breaking through a block?
Often when you're feeling creatively drained, it's because you're not getting enough new input. When you expose yourself to new ideas, different perspectives, it's like you're giving your brain fresh material to work with.
Right.
It can spark those unexpected connections,
Yeah.
help you think in ways you wouldn't have thought of on your own.
Yeah.
And sometimes just the act of talking about your work with someone else, that can really help you pinpoint what's tripping you up.
Right.
And once you've done that, sometimes the solution becomes clear, or maybe they'll have a suggestion that gets you unstuck.
Yeah.
It's like having another set of eyes and ears on the problem.
Absolutely. Sometimes it just helps to say things out loud.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, think about whether there's someone you trust, a friend, a colleague, who you could talk to about your project. Even just a quick chat can often make a bigger difference than you might think. Now, Blaize also mentioned something that's really easy to forget when you're, really focused on your writing.
Right. Taking care of yourself. Blaize is really big on this.
Yeah.
Getting enough sleep, eating healthy, getting some exercise, making sure you take breaks, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's basic stuff, but it's so important.
Writer's block can sometimes be a sign that you're burning out, or that you're just running on empty.
It's so easy to just push through, though, when you feel like you have to get things done.
Oh, yeah.
So how does not taking care of yourself actually contribute to feeling blocked?
Think of it this way. Your brain and your creativity is part of that. It's like a resource, okay, May? And if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating well, if you're not taking breaks, that resource gets depleted. A tired, stressed out brain just can't function at its best.
Right.
It's not going to be as flexible. It's not going to be as good at making those creative leaps.
Yeah. It's like trying to run a marathon without any fuel. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall.
Exactly.
And sometimes, writer's block, that's the wall.
Yeah.
So sometimes the best thing you can do for your writing is to actually just step away for a bit.
Yeah.
Go for a walk, take a nap, whatever you need to recharge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so last but not least, Blaize talks about the mental side of writer's block.
Yes. This is about how you think about writer's block.
Right.
Instead of seeing it as this huge, scary obstacle, Blaize suggests trying to see it as a signal.
A signal.
Like a signal that maybe you need to try a different approach, or maybe you just need to take a break.
Okay.
And this is really important. It's also about letting go of the need to be perfect, especially in the early stages of writing.
I can see how that would take a lot of pressure off.
It does. When you stop thinking of writer's block as a personal failure, when you start to see it as just a normal part of the process, you don't get so anxious about it. And that frees you up to experiment more, to not be so afraid of writing something that isn't perfect right away.
Yeah.
Because that pressure to create a masterpiece on the first try, that can be really paralyzing.
It's like give yourself permission to just get the ideas out, knowing that you can always go back and make it better later.
Exactly.
So that's a really key takeaway. Don't aim for perfection right away. Just focus on getting the words down on the page.
You can always polish them later.
Okay, so Blaize wraps things up with a really important point. Can you summarize that for our listeners?
The main message is that writer's block is incredibly common. And the good news is there's not just one solution. There are all these different strategies you can try.
Right.
And the most important thing, Blaize says, is to be willing to experiment. Find what works for you. Remember that you have options and that this feeling of being stuck, it's not forever.
Yeah.
Just knowing that can give you a sense of control and help you get back to writing with more energy and a better attitude.
Absolutely. So just to recap everything we've talked about today, we looked at how changing your environment can help, the power of free writing and brainstorming, going back and revisiting your work, shifting your perspective, seeking inspiration from outside sources, taking care of yourself, and changing the way you think about writer's block itself.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But I think what's really clear from Blaize on Fire is that when you hit that wall, when you feel stuck, it's not the end of the road. It's more like a sign that it's time to try a different route.
I like that.
And we've gone through a lot of different ways you can do that, all based on what you sent us.
Right.
So as we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with this question. What's one small thing you could do today? Just one little change that might help you see things differently, or maybe even spark some new ideas for that project you're working on.
Yeah. Think about that.
It's definitely something to keep in mind as you continue your creative journey.